In the shadows of the American justice system, there are names not only sentenced, but etched into history as harbingers of unspeakable terror. One man murdered 2 guards to escape prison. Another wiped out an entire family, including children, out of fear of being caught. One stayed silent until the very end, then whispered, "I have no regrets." Missouri, a state that makes up less than 2% of the U.S. population, ranks among the top 5 in executions since 1976. Even more striking, many of the state's most brutal executions happened in just the past 2 decades. This is a list of the 10 most cold-blooded death row inmates, men who didn't just kill, but walked into the death chamber without ever looking back. Each left behind a story, a crime, a final meal, a last word, and sometimes a haunting silence. Before we begin, leave a comment below. Where are you watching from? Which state or country? Let's see how far these stories reach. And now let's begin with the first. First, Michael Andrew Tisius. He was only 19. But on the night of June 22, 2000, Michael Tisius crossed the line from immaturity into the mind of a killer. It all began with whispered plans inside a cell at Randolph County Jail. Tisius and his cellmate, Roy Vance, a seasoned thief, plotted an escape. But instead of stealth, they chose blood. After being released, Tisius didn't return home. He quietly prepared weapons and headed back to the jail where only 2 guards were working the night shift. What he carried wasn't remorse. It was live ammunition. 2 gunshots, 2 men down. They weren't enemies. They weren't criminals. Just 2 men doing their jobs, Jason Acton and Leon Egley, killed for simply being on duty. Tisius was arrested shortly after without resistance. He knew the road had ended. In court, his lawyers cited mitigating factors, his youth emotional trauma, and the fact that he was easily influenced. But to the jury, the lives of 2 husbands, 2 fathers could not be erased by the word immature. The death sentence was handed down. A teenager not even 20 officially became a man on death row. Tisius lived more than 2 decades on death row. He learned to draw, wrote poems and letters. Human rights groups pleaded for clemency, citing his age at the time of the crime. But Missouri stood firm. On June 6, 2023, Michael Andrew Tisius entered the death chamber at Bonne Terre Prison. His final meal was simple, almost childlike: 2 bacon cheeseburgers, regular and curly fries, and a chocolate milkshake. Just before the injection, Tisius said, "Only, I'm sorry." 2 plain words. No justification. No resistance. Yet, they couldn't bring back the lives of 2 men who fell because they showed up for work. 8 family members of the victims were present at the execution. They didn't speak publicly. They didn't cry. They weren't angry. They were just silent. Mark Nichols, former sheriff of Randolph County and once the victim's superior, said, "I think this will allow Jason and Leon's families to begin healing. They no longer have to endure endless appeals or relive this nightmare over and over. Because sometimes, pain doesn't scream. It just leaves one empty chair at the dinner table. Forever." Second, Walter E. Barton. On October 9, 1991, in the town of Ozark, Missouri, 81-year-old Gladys Keeler, a beloved and respected member of the community, was found dead in her home within the trailer park she managed. She was known for helping tenants and had adopted a daughter she loved as her own. Just hours earlier, she had invited a few people, including Walter Barton, to help clean up after the funeral of her adopted daughter's husband. Several people were at the trailer park that day, and Barton was reportedly the last person to see her alive. About 45 minutes after leaving her home, Barton returned with another person. According to his statement, he found her unconscious inside. He claimed he had tried to help, and that's how her blood ended up on his clothes. However, police quickly identified Barton as the prime suspect. His shirt and pants contained 3 small blood stains, which the Missouri State Crime Lab said matched the victim's DNA. The case also relied on testimony from a fellow inmate who claimed Barton had confessed while in jail though the credibility of that statement was later heavily questioned. Despite proclaiming his innocence, Barton was arrested and charged in a case that would span nearly 3 decades with controversy that never faded. The legal battle stretched over a decade, involving 5 trials and 2 overturned convictions due to procedural errors. Independent legal groups, including the Innocence Project, argued that the evidence was weak, built on unreliable testimony and questionable blood analysis. Still, in 2006, Barton was sentenced to death. More than 14 years later, Missouri carried out the execution, ignoring calls to delay it for further investigation. On May 19, 2020, at Bonne Terre Prison, Walter Barton was taken to the death chamber. His final meal was elaborate: a double bacon cheeseburger, cheesy hash browns, banana cream pie, cherry, pepper barbecued pork, baked potato with cheese, and pecan pie with a scoop of vanilla ice cream. When asked for his final words, he lifted his head and spoke clearly. "Walter Archie Barton am innocent, and they are executing an innocent man." He was the first person executed in the United States after the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic. The victim's family, Gladys Keeler's relatives, did not attend the execution. But some later said that while the loss was unbearable, justice had to be served. Even after Barton's death, one question remains. Was this justice, or the tragedy of a system that can make mistakes? Third, Russell Earl Bucklew. Russell Bucklew is no stranger to American criminal justice history. But not only for his crimes, he became known for the way Missouri chose to execute him, despite a legal battle that lasted nearly 20 years. In 1996, Bucklew launched a violent attack aimed at his ex-girlfriend's new partner. He kidnapped used weapons and severely injured multiple people. After fleeing, he was caught in a gunfight with police, during which he was also wounded. The case shocked the public not just for the personal motive, but for its sheer brutality. The court sentenced Bucklew to death shortly after. But the story didn't end there. Bucklew suffered from a rare medical condition, cavernous hemangioma, which caused large blood-filled tumors in his head, neck, and throat. Doctors warned that the execution could cause extreme pain and severe complications. A legal fight began. Bucklew requested execution by nitrogen gas, a method considered less painful. Missouri refused. The case reached the United States Supreme Court. In April 2019, the court ruled 5-4. The Constitution does not guarantee a painless death. Missouri could proceed with lethal injection. On October 1, 2019, at Bonne Terre Prison, Russell Bucklew entered the death chamber. Despite concerns, the execution went forward without major complications, at least according to staff present. His final meal included a gyro sandwich, smoked meat, 2 orders of fries, a can of soda, and banana pudding. A meal full of fat, meat, and sweetness, perhaps the last thing he could freely choose. His final words were not officially recorded. Media reports only noted that he spoke a few words to his family and attorney before receiving the first injection. The victims' families did not speak publicly, but court records describe years of trauma, fear, and loss following the attack. To many, Russell Bucklew symbolizes a justice system that shows no mercy. But to others, his case is a reminder. Even for the guilty, death should be seen through the lens of justice and humanity. Fourth, David Zink. Night had just fallen along a quiet stretch of highway near Strafford, Missouri. 19-year-old Amanda Morton, a bright and promising college student, was driving home after visiting a friend when another car struck the rear of her vehicle. The impact wasn't severe, but the man who stepped out, David Zink, already had a plan in motion. There were no witnesses, no surveillance cameras. On a pitch-black road with no streetlights, Zink forced Amanda out of her car. That was the last moment she was seen free. The next morning, Amanda's Chevrolet Cavalier was found. The engine was still running, headlights on, hazard lights blinking. The driver's window rolled down, her purse and phone left behind. But Amanda was gone. Her family immediately contacted police. Panic spread, and a statewide search began. A breakthrough came when a motel clerk in Camdenton, about 80 miles from the scene, recognized Amanda's photo on the news. She recalled the young woman had checked in with a man named David Zink. The information was turned over to the authorities. Police tracked Zink to his parents' home. He didn't resist. He didn't deny. He calmly confessed from the staged crash to taking Amanda to a remote location and committing a brutal act in a cemetery meant for eternal rest. His confession shocked investigators, not just for the crime, but for the chilling ease with which he told the story, like checking something off a list. Zink's trial moved swiftly. With his criminal record full confession and corroborating evidence, a death sentence was inevitable. He spent 11 years on death row. There were no drawn-out appeals, no human rights campaigns, just silence from a man who knew what he had done. On July 14, 2015, David Zink entered the death chamber at Bonne Terre Prison. His final meal was simple: a grilled cheese sandwich, fries, cheesecake, and a soda, as plain as his quiet surrender to fate. Before the injection, Zink said, "I can't imagine the pain Amanda's family and friends have suffered. I offer my sincerest apology. I hope this brings them peace." Amanda Morton's family was present. They didn't cry, they didn't speak, but their gaze, like a final verdict, would never forget. To many, Zink was justice served. But for those who see the darkness in the human soul, his story is a tragedy of a life that could have taken a different road, but chose to drive into the night. 5th, Michael Shane Worthington. On the night of September 30th, 1995, at a quiet apartment complex in Lake St. Louis, Missouri, 24-year-old Melinda Mindy Griffin, a senior finance student at the University of Missouri St. Louis, became the victim of a brutal crime. Her neighbor, Michael Shane Worthington, broke into her apartment through a window and committed acts that would end her life. After the murder, he stole her car, jewelry, credit cards, and phone. Worthington was arrested the next day, caught driving Mindy's car, and confessed immediately. DNA evidence confirmed his admission. At his 1998 trial, Worthington pleaded guilty to first-degree murder, rape, and robbery. He was sentenced to death and never appealed the verdict. During his time on death row, he and his lawyers filed for clemency, arguing the death penalty was unfair and driven by vengeance. But Missouri Governor Jay Nixon denied the request, and the United States Supreme Court refused to delay the execution. On August 6, 2014, Michael Shane Worthington, age 43, was executed by lethal injection at the Eastern Reception Diagnostic and Correctional Center in Bonne Terre. He was pronounced dead at 12:11 in the morning. His final meal, like a typical night at a classic American diner, included a cheeseburger, French fries, a ribeye steak, and crispy fried onions. Nothing extravagant, nothing symbolic, just his choice for one final dinner. When asked for last words, Worthington spoke without hesitation. His voice was clear and firm. "Thank you. I'm finally at peace with my true father. I won't suffer anymore. It's my friends and family who have truly suffered. May God forgive those who call this justice, because in truth this was about politics and revenge. Amen. And peace to you all." Mindy's mother, Carol Angelbeck, witnessed the execution. She later shared, "I feel relief that he's dead. I won't have to face him or the legal system again. Now it's only about Mindy." Michael Shane Worthington's case sparked debate over the death penalty, particularly around transparency and the source of lethal drugs. But for Mindy Griffin's family, the execution brought closure to a nearly 20-year chapter of pain. 6. Mark Anthony Christeson. On the morning of February 1, 1998, the calm of rural Vichy, Missouri was shattered by one of the most disturbing crimes in the state's history. Inside a small home on a dirt road, Susan Brooke, a single mother, was starting an ordinary day with her two children, 12-year-old Adrian and 9-year-old Kyle. Mark Anthony Christeson, age 18, and his 17-year-old cousin, Jesse Carter, had just escaped from a juvenile facility. They were planning to steal and flee the state, but when they saw the Brooke home, the plan took a darker, violent turn. They broke in not to rob, but to take control. Christeson restrained the family and sexually assaulted Susan. Then, the three were forced into Susan's Dodge Caravan and driven to a pond several miles away. Along the way, Adrian tried to escape but failed, and all three victims were forced to the ground. One by one, they were murdered and thrown into the water. The legal documents revealed a level of cruelty that stunned investigators, especially knowing Adrian and Kyle were too young to understand what was happening. Christeson and Carter fled the state with the stolen vehicle and belongings. But within 2 weeks, they were arrested in California after police identified the van and traced it back to them. They were extradited to Missouri. At trial, Jesse Carter cooperated with prosecutors and testified against his cousin in exchange for a life sentence. Christeson, who had taken the lead in the crime, received the death penalty. His appeals dragged on for over a decade, delayed in part by a mistake from his original attorneys, who filed the appeal 117 days late. As a result, the courts rejected all of Christeson's claims based on procedure. The U.S. Supreme Court later appointed new counsel, but it was too late to change the outcome. On January 31, 2017, Mark Christeson was executed by lethal injection at the Eastern Reception Diagnostic and Correctional Center in Bonne Terre. He was pronounced dead at 7:05 in the evening. His final meal was simple but complete: a bacon cheeseburger, crispy fries, a slice of pecan pie, and a cold can of soda. No flair, no drama. Just one last taste of something familiar. Before the injection, when asked if he had any last words, Christeson looked toward the witnesses and said, "Please let my family know that I love them with all my heart. I feel so very blessed to have them in my life. And thank God for giving me such a wonderful family." After nearly 2 decades of waiting for justice, the victim's family finally felt relief. Harley Brooke, the half-sister of Adrian and Kyle, shared, "19 years ago, my siblings were taken from me. Today, we finally have justice for them." 7th, Johnny Allen Johnson. On the morning of July 26, 2002 in Valley Park, Missouri, a small town where everyone knows each other, 6-year-old Casey Williamson suddenly vanished from her mother's home. She was spending the summer with her biological father, Ernie Williamson. The last person to see her was her father, who had stepped out of the bathroom for just a moment. When he returned, Casey was gone. After 30 minutes of frantic searching, the family contacted police. A massive search operation began. Police, FBI agents, search dogs, and hundreds of volunteers poured into Valley Park. Posters with Casey's innocent face appeared everywhere, but hope quickly turned into dread. A witness recalled seeing Johnny Johnson, a familiar face in the community, 24 years old, carrying Casey away that morning. Johnson had once lived in the neighborhood and had received help from the Williamson family. Few knew he had a history of mental illness and had been treated in psychiatric facilities. Police soon identified him as a suspect. Just hours later, Johnson was arrested. In custody, he confessed, admitting to taking Casey to an abandoned glass factory and describing what followed in chilling detail. Casey, a first grader, never came home. In 2005, Johnson was sentenced to death. His lawyers argued for years that he had schizophrenia and lacked the mental capacity to be executed. They claimed he believed his death would trigger the apocalypse caused by Satan. But the courts, including the U.S. Supreme Court, rejected all appeals. On August 1, 2023, Johnny Johnson, age 45, was executed by lethal injection at the Eastern Reception Diagnostic and Correctional Center in Bonne Terre. He was pronounced dead at 6:33 in the evening. His final meal was simple: a bacon cheeseburger topped with cheese golden curly fries and a cold strawberry milkshake. Nothing remarkable. But it was the final choice of a man who had strayed far from anything right. Just before the drugs entered his system, Johnson whispered his last words: "God bless. I'm sorry to the people and families I've hurt." Casey Williamson's family waited over 20 years to see justice fulfilled. Though some relatives opposed the death penalty, many believed the execution was necessary to close this painful chapter in their lives. 8. William Rousan. On September 21, 1993, in the quiet countryside near Bonne Terre, Missouri, a horrific crime shattered the peace of a rural community. 37-year-old William Rousan, along with his 16-year-old son Brent and his brother Robert, planned to steal livestock from the farm of elderly couple Charles and Grace Lewis. But the plan turned deadly. Charles and Grace were brutally murdered. Their bodies were buried in a shallow grave covered with concrete and animal manure. The crime remained undiscovered for nearly a year until a hunter found the couple's burned-out truck in a remote area. The investigation soon led to the arrest of the three suspects. Robert Rousan cooperated with authorities and pled guilty to second-degree murder. He received a 15-year sentence and was released in 2001. Brent Rousan was sentenced to life without parole. William Rousan, as the mastermind behind the killings, was sentenced to death. Throughout the trial and appeals process, Rousan showed no remorse. At one point, he even made conflicting claims, including an accusation that the victim's son had hired him to kill his parents, a claim for which no evidence was ever found. On April 23, 2014, William Rousan, age 57, was executed by lethal injection at the Eastern Reception Diagnostic and Correctional Center in Bonne Terre. He was pronounced dead at 12:10 in the morning. Before the injection, Rousan said, "My trials and mistakes have been many. But thanks be to Lord Jesus, I have a new home in his heavenly kingdom. May forgiveness and peace be found for all in Christ Jesus." His final meal was modest: a bacon cheeseburger, crispy onion rings, a cold soda, and a sweet slice of pecan pie. In his final moment, he chose simplicity, as if trying to end life's chaos with something familiar. 5 members of the victim's family witnessed the execution. Michael Lewis, the couple's son, later said he felt no relief or satisfaction as nothing could bring his parents back. 9th. Herbert Smulls. At noon on July 27, 1991, in the bustling commercial district of Chesterfield, Missouri, 29-year-old Herbert Smulls and 15-year-old Norman Brown walked into F&M Crown Jewels. Posing as customers shopping for engagement rings, they were welcomed by the owners, 51-year-old Stephen Honickman and his wife, 44-year-old Florence. As Stephen turned away, Smulls drew a gun. In a split second, a routine business transaction turned into an armed robbery. Smulls opened fire, killing Stephen instantly. Florence was also shot, but in a desperate act of survival, she played dead. That instinct saved her life. The 2 robbers fled, taking jewelry, diamond rings, and cash. The crime, committed in broad daylight in a busy area, sent shockwaves through the community. Thanks to Florence's vivid description, police identified the suspects later that same day. Smulls was arrested soon after, and the evidence led directly to him. He was sentenced to death in 1992. But the appeals process stretched over 2 decades. One major point of contention was that the only black juror was removed, resulting in an all-white jury. Smulls' attorneys argued this violated his constitutional rights, but the courts declined to reopen the case. On January 29, 2014, after multiple delays, Herbert Smulls was executed by lethal injection at the Bonne Terre prison. He did not offer final words, only nodding to 2 witnesses. The injection process lasted 9 minutes. He was pronounced dead at 10:20 at night. His final meal had a traditional Southern flavor: crispy fried chicken, a hearty steak, tender collard greens, creamy mac and cheese, and sweet candied yams. It ended with warm cornbread chocolate cake and a cold can of cola. In his final hours, Smulls didn't seek extravagance. He returned to the tastes of his youth. As the drugs entered his system, he said little. But in the stillness of the room, he whispered through labored breath, "My body feels like it's burning." 10th. Alan Nicklasson. On a sweltering August afternoon in 1994, along Interstate 70 near Kingdom City, Missouri, an old Chevrolet Caprice carrying 3 men. Alan Nicklasson, Dennis Skillicorn, and Tim DeGraffenried suddenly broke down in the middle of the road. The trio was en route from Kansas City to St. Louis to buy drugs, armed with guns and ammunition stolen days earlier from a nearby home. As they struggled with the car, a man pulled over to help. That man was 47-year-old Richard Drummond, a kind-hearted AT&T telecommunications engineer who didn't hesitate to assist strangers. But that kindness was repaid with cruelty. Nicklasson pulled a gun and forced Drummond to let the group into his car and keep driving. Drummond complied, likely hoping to defuse the situation peacefully. Eventually, they ordered him to turn onto a dirt road leading into the woods of Lafayette County. There, in the quiet of nature, Alan Nicklasson executed Richard Drummond, who never made it back home. After the murder, Nicklasson and Skillicorn fled west to Arizona, where they committed 2 more killings before being captured and extradited back to Missouri. Skillicorn was executed in 2009. Nicklasson continued to appeal for nearly 2 decades, repeatedly citing issues with his legal representation. But on December 11, 2013, the U.S. Supreme Court denied his final appeal, clearing the way for his execution. His final meal was served around 4 in the evening on December 10, 2013. He chose a simple meal, a meat pizza, and a glass of orange juice. The next morning, he made no special requests. He ate the standard prison breakfast just like every other inmate. When the time came, Alan Nicklasson offered no final words to the public. He simply bowed his head in silent prayer, with the prison chaplain a moment shared only between him and God. 10 stories. 10 executions, and dozens of lives lost, not only those who were killed, but also the families left behind, carrying pain that may never be healed. Behind each death row, name is a chain of wrong turns repeated until the path ran out. But behind each victim, there's an unfinished dinner, an empty chair at the table, and a silence that never ends. We can debate the death penalty, whether it's right or wrong justice or revenge. But one thing is undeniable. Every life taken, whether by crime or punishment, leaves an echo. If you believe these stories deserve to be heard, leave a like to support the channel. And don't forget to comment, where are you watching from? Which state or country? Let's see how far these stories reach. Subscribe so you won't miss what comes next. There are still many stories waiting to be told, with respect, with truth, and with compassion.